All right, so my name is Ramana Nanda. I am the Associate Dean for Enterprise at the Business School and also the co-director of the Institute for Deep Tech Entrepreneurship at Imperial. And it is my great pleasure to be moderating this second panel on government and investors in decarbonizing we're in hard-to-decarbonize areas, all right? So if we kind of think about the arc of what's happened, Richard very nicely puts the context around where investment is, where are some of the big things that we need to be worried about. We then talked about the energy sector in quite a lot of detail. And now we're going to transition to talking about all the other stuff that's not in the energy sector, okay? And we're going to take both a perspective from government, a little bit of a perspective from investors, and then a perspective from entrepreneurs as well. Okay, so just to preview the panel, you will have hopefully clicked your QR codes and gone and read the bios, but very quickly, to my first on my left is Sarah Hunter. Sarah is a non-exec director at ARIA, which is, as many of you know, a £1 billion effort by the UK government to try to be like DARPA and more. And we'll talk a little bit about what ARIA is doing in the energy and climate space. Prior to that, Sarah spent over a decade at Google X and as director, global head of public policy. And she has also had a career in government as a special advisor to the Blair government. So please welcome Sarah. All right. Next, we have Christina Chang. Christina is a partner at LowerCarbon Capital, which is a multi-billion-dollar venture fund. So when we talk about the 4 million versus the 450 million, some of the people who are contributing to, well, not exactly that particular company, but we have a representative. Christina's based in Boston, but we're delighted she was visiting London this week in any case. And
I was visiting for this.
You were visiting for this. Look at that. Okay, perfect. Prior to that, Christina worked at ARPA-E, and she has a PhD in chemistry from Harvard and actually has a master's from Imperial. So welcome back to our campus, Christina, and please give Christina a warm round of applause. And last but not least, we have Osas Omogiade. Osas is the CEO and founder of Deep.Meta, which is an AI-based software technology that's trying to think about how best to decarbonize the metals industry in terms of metals manufacturing and production. And he's very passionate about the circular economy. Also has a PhD from Imperial in the materials department.
That's correct.
And we're delighted that you're joining us as well. So please welcome Osas.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to start off with a couple of questions, specific questions to the panelists. Then we'll go into a discussion, and then we'll leave plenty of time for all of you for your questions. Okay. So what I thought, maybe we'll start with Christina. And if you could tell us, Christina, what are the things that you are looking at as an investor? Where are the areas that you think we as society can be putting our money to work that are also generating investment opportunities for you? And then perhaps if you could also contextualize that in the context of the IRA, which a lot of people, Inflation Reduction Act rather than anything else the IRA stands for, that if you could tell us a little bit about how, if any, a way that's changing how you're thinking about where your investments are attractive.
Absolutely. LowerCarbon Capital, we're a multi-billion-dollar VC firm investing in early-stage climate technologies. And for me, climate tech really means remaking the entire world, essentially, and doing so sustainably and doing so profitably. So if there's one thing that I think I hope that the audience will take from this panel today, it's that investing and working in climate tech is the single biggest opportunity that we will live through in our lifetimes. And not only is that an opportunity for impact, so you get to wake up every day and your job description is to save the planet, how cool is that? Mm-hmm. But also the folks that will invent the processes that are just cheaper in addition to being cleaner than the way we travel, heat and cool ourselves, make things today. Those folks will be heroes for the planet that will make a bunch of money in the process. So this is an important opportunity for everyone to dig in. The three areas that we invest in are 1, decarbonization, 2, drawing historical greenhouse gases down from the atmosphere, and 3, climate resilience and adaptation, buying more time for folks that are already on the front lines of climate change, because as we heard from Richard and his group, we are reaching 1.5 very rapidly. In fact, we've hit 1.5 in temperature deltas in many parts of the world already. So that's a quick overview of the three areas. Happy to dig in more. But essentially, whether it's cheap compute, AI, ML, which of course is exploding and changing rapidly right now, new electrochemistries that have been enabled by advances in batteries and material science that weren't available 20 years ago, or CRISPR-Cas9 or gene editing, or directed evolution, these technologies are making possible cheaper ways to make things, get around, et cetera, than was available even 10, 20 years ago. And so there's just a number of drivers that are influencing our investments, whether it's technologies that I mentioned, policy, of course, which we'll talk about in just a second, talent, right? Folks are leaving Facebook, Amazon, et cetera, and saying, I want to have a really positive impact, not make another widget, and taking advantage of this opportunity right now that we're seeing in the sort of layoffs in the tech sector to move into climate and move into impact, in addition, of course, to the economics making sense now. So essentially, y'all are familiar with solar and wind being just cheaper now than fossil-based electricity production. And what I want to leave you with is that wave of innovation is coming for every other sector of the world. And so these technology opportunities and all of these tailwinds, including domestic and national security, and critical supply chains that are broken. These are all moving in the same direction of climate tech. So basically, in summary, it just makes money to do good now. And happy to talk about any of these specifics. With respect to the IRA, so the United States has passed legislation in the past 2 years that totals about $2 trillion, and that's 3 legislation pieces. The BIL, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, this CHIPS and Science Act, and then, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. And together, these $2 trillion are helping essentially pour federal funding into clean energy. And the goal of all of this, especially the IRA, is to help drive down emissions in the US by the end of the decade. And of course, that's like 6.5 years away. And so this set of policies has a remit for 10 years. Now, within the IRA in particular, which is most focused on clean energy, that's about $400 billion of the $2 trillion umbrella, although most of that is enacted in tax credits. And so the amount that goes out the door will really depend on what the debt ceiling is. So there are some estimates saying that $400 billion could really be close to $1 trillion, depending on, again, what the debt ceiling is at that time. So there's flexibility that folks are trying to understand at the moment. There are discussions about what all the numbers will actually mean. That said, the main areas that are focused on in the IRA are clean energy, and that includes solar PV manufacturing and onshoring the supply chains needed for transmission and the electricity grid more generally. Second to that in dollar amount would be the clean transportation, including the battery infrastructure, essentially sustainable manufacturing of battery cathodes, et cetera. That includes critical minerals, and that includes essentially extra incentives if you've manufactured things domestically. And then the list goes on from there and includes direct air capture, CCS, hydrogen, and other clean fuels, you name it. In addition to, so again, tax credits is the main thing, but you've also got loan program guarantees and grants for R&D, sort of early stage, as well as a lot of money for pilots and for demonstrations. So what does this mean for investment in this space, especially in the United States? Well, frankly, as you heard from my intro, we were already investing in our main three areas: decarb, drawdown, and resilience. And so essentially what the IRA is doing is making things that were good even better. It essentially supercharges every single portfolio company in the lower carbon family. And I will say that because the IRA is set to last for about 10 years, it doesn't change what nth of a kind plant economics will look like. And so as we do diligence and look at the techno-economics and the models for what the technology at scale will cost, the IRA really can't factor in ultimately because we don't know where it will go after 10 years. That said, it makes things more economic within the intervening 10 years, and so that means it can help ease the way economically for your early pilot or your demonstration or perhaps your first of a kind plant. These things may take 5 years to plan and a year to build, so you're talking about your first or second plant. So it has caused all of us to try to understand what is the pretty detailed timeline for deployment and how costs come down, and how folks are achieving economies of scale and economies of mass production, and over what timeline that takes. But yes, the many companies in our portfolio, for example, that are powered by green electricity, that makes their economics for their first plant look really good. In addition to, of course, OSED, the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations piece in all of this, which provides a lot of money, call it perhaps $50 to $100 million of the demonstration plant, so like the pre-commercial plant that you might be putting together. And so everyone is trying to do their best on those applications to those programs.
Fantastic. Yeah. So just picking up a couple of threads and then connecting it to a question for Sarah. I think one of the things that you mentioned was that one, technology is just making the cost of learning and de-risking lower. But there still are areas where it becomes hard for VCs to truly deploy their capital because of the long timelines, perhaps, or the amount of cash that it takes to de-risk a technology. And that's where some of this early stage de-risking funding can be particularly valuable. It seems like that's one of the goals of ARIA, is to help with the early stage invention, translation support. And I'd love to hear from you, Sarah, about how ARIA is thinking about this, what role climate plays in the overall equation, and how, if any way, you're thinking about responding to some of the things that are coming down on the other side of the Atlantic in terms of policy.
Sure. So ARIA, for those of you who don't know, is a new UK R&D funding agency that was really inspired by DARPA and ARPA-E and IARPA and all the various ARPAs that have subsequently sprung up in the US. And the idea is that we exist to enable scientists and entrepreneurs and technologists to really be much more ambitious than the existing mechanisms of research and funding allow them to be. We are going to be different, however, from the ARPAs in that we don't have another letter. We're not defense focused, we're not energy focused, we're not intelligence focused. We are just invention and innovation focused. And that's exciting because the thesis that we've got is that we're really going to invest in the individuals. We had this conversation earlier. Really, all invention and innovation is all about the talent. We all talk about technology, it's actually about the talent. And so if you can find the people with the scientific and technology skills and expertise, but also the mindset to be able to set really bold goals and corral different agencies and inventors and funders to all focus on the same goal, then we think we're going to have more likelihood of making a big difference to UK society, environment and economies. So to your question about climate, I really hope there's something in the ARIA first wave of funding, and we're going to do that will be climate focused, but I don't know. We've spent the last 6 months, we're only in existence since January, and we spent the last 6 months really focusing on hiring our first set of program directors. And in the autumn, we'll talk about who they are and what their sort of areas of expertise will be. So I don't want to sort of preempt that. What I would say, though, is I think the UK has got some really unique opportunities in climate tech. There's some things about the country itself that make us well-placed. I think our energy system or our grid is relatively functional certainly compared to the US. And with a regulator that's actually quite innovation-focused, and one regulator, not 50-plus regulators. So I think actually we're in a really good position to do innovation on the grid. And we've got some great scientific and technology talent in this country, despite the fact we're very small. So I think there's some characteristics about this country that will make us well-placed to do that. And I think to your point about the IRA is amazing, and I still am working with a number of US technologists who are enormously emboldened and frankly funded, or theoretically funded by IRA money. But I think in the UK, there are other assets that we can bring. ARIA is a relatively small pot of money, but I think we have capabilities like changing the permitting and planning rules in this country that will never happen effectively in the US, that we could do in this country, because you do have quite a small country, and it's basically one national government who can make those decisions. So I think actually the opportunities, I love the IRA because it sets a really bold goal and it is universally focused on all different types of technology. But I think the UK should sort of respond, and at ARIA we should respond in a slightly different way, but equaling the ambition.
Fantastic. Excellent. So we'll turn to one of the talented people that we talk about when we talk about talent. Osas, it would be great to hear from you, a little bit about what your startup's actually doing. And then you've been fortunate enough to get a UKRI grant. Yeah. So if you wouldn't mind sort of talking a little bit about what was the process like, what have you benefited from the grant, and also just how in general entrepreneurs are thinking about some of this early stage translational funding coming from the UKRI.
Thank you, Romana. Hi, everyone. I'm Osas, as was mentioned earlier. I'm the founder of Deep.Meta. So in terms of what we do, Deep.Meta is AI for circular metals production. And what that means is that we take data that is already being produced on metal production lines, and we're focused at the moment on steel. And we use that information that they are already producing to be able to identify what the optimal state is in a given process. For example, if in a reheat furnace, which is one of the stages of production, you tend to reheat these sort of monolithic, huge slabs of steel inside what is effectively a giant oven. And how long should it be heated there for? At the moment, a lot of it is quite conservative, and so it means that we have steel producers using a lot more energy than they need to. And so our AI determines what the optimal state would be, and that is typically a lower time than what is being done usually on average. And so we're able to get savings of around 8 to 15% in terms of the amount of energy spent in that particular process. And so as a result, we're lowering their carbon emissions. So that's how we add value. And so in terms of like the talent piece and how it links to Imperial and how I got into this, people always say, why steel? It's so niche and so strange. Well, I spent 4 years in a steel lab, but I was also very fortunate to be sponsored by a large steel organization in the UK. And so while I did my PhD at Imperial, I also spent some time over at their sites and in their production lines and also in their labs. So that kind of gave me lots of insights into how they solve problems, gave me insights into how they're using their data at the moment and how they acquire them. And so they have this sort of perfect storm, if you like, of data that is coming out of their machines. And at the same time, they are meticulously noting down whenever things go wrong, when it went wrong, who was on shift, what was it that went wrong, etc. But the way that they were going about trying to resolve these issues were pretty slow, and they weren't using approaches that otherwise could could spearhead and can completely, like, if you like, put a jetpack behind their problem-solving approaches. And that's where Deep.Meta comes in. That's where we feel like there is an opportunity to sort of marry AI with a very traditional institution where they have lots of legacy systems. And the way that we approach this is we're not just going through the pure AI approach, we're combining established scientific approaches in modeling metallurgical processes with AI. And so that allows us to be able to really add value in a very specific part of their process, while still being able to have a scalability component to it, whereas we're adding value to your mill, but we can equally add that value to others because we're taking into account the actual physics. And so to your point about talent, who wants to solve a problem that combines AI and metallurgical modeling and takes into account physics and put those together to provide something that's completely new? Really smart people, right? And so it's great because it attracts talent. And that's one thing I think that a lot of deep tech founders benefit from. It's about being able to attract really interesting and interested talent pool. And when you combine that with this sort of edge of, hey, actually, we're not just doing it because it's cool, it's also gonna help to reduce carbon emissions in the steel industry by 20% without them changing any of their hardware. And for those of you who don't know, so steel is the most used engineering metal in the world. We make 1.8 billion tons of it, but for every ton of steel we make 2 tons of CO2. So steel factories are more like CO2 factories. And that isn't ideal. And so as a result, 10% of global emissions is from steel. And there's loads of technologies coming out which are trying to reduce, rather trying to change the way we make steel entirely. And I'm all for those, and I think those are amazing. Our approach is AI focused. And that's partly because of the sort of time frame when we were born. We were born in a context where COVID was very much all around us. And so in terms of access to capital, in terms of like willingness to spend, et cetera, from customers, they weren't in the sort of mindset of wanting to go about forking out huge sums. So we thought, how can we solve this problem around climate change while still making it affordable and accessible? So I've gone on for quite a while about my own company, which I'm very passionate about, as you can imagine. And I've not said anything about the UKRI.
Yeah.
So UKRI is really cool. It's really cool because it basically multiplies your money. So let's say you are a founder doing some really interesting technology, right? And it costs 100K. An investor only has to give you, say, 30K. And all of a sudden, it becomes 100K through lots of admin. But the key...
That's quite good value for money. All you have to do is some
forms. I know you want to do some forms,
and
you get like, it's not bad at all. And that's really cool for 2 reasons. It's cool because it gives you free money as a founder, but also it helps to de-risk your business to investors. They say, okay, look, the government has already invested in you, and they're effectively an investor, right? And so when they take that stance, then it makes you a more compelling proposition to the investor. It also makes you a more compelling proposition to potential customers. And so we've leveraged this to basically acquire lots of people into a consortium. So it's low risk for them, high upside for us. We get partners that we can build with and potential customers out the other end, and they get a technology that is going to change their business. So I sort of already alluded to it, but obviously that's some of the pros of it, and the other side is on the cons of this approach, is that if you are a cash flow intensive company, it can be really tricky for you if you're not well capitalized, because the funding that you get from the government typically comes in every 3 months. And if you have like a weird gap you need to bridge, it can put you in a precarious position. In contrast, some of the funding routes which are available in Europe, they actually provide you the money up front, which is a lot more attractive when you're doing something that's very high risk.
Yeah, and it also reduces your cash flow requirements. You have to raise less from external investors if you got it all up front. I'm going to leave enough time for the audience, but I thought one question that often kind of percolates in conferences like this is the interaction between government policy, investors, and place. So we talk a lot in this country bemoaning about how it's better in other parts of the world. And in particular, when it comes to capital, we talk about the fact that particularly late-stage capital, the kinds of checks you can write, $50 million at a time, are just not available here in the UK. And I'm curious to hear maybe a little bit from you, Christina. How do you think about the location of the places where you make investments in? I know you make a lot of seed investments here in the UK. Will those ultimately move over to the US when it's time to hire lots of people?
Oh, this is a great question. So I've taken a look at LowerCarbon Capital's investments. So we invest globally, and we see everything, every deal essentially. And so when I say that, when I look at the hubs of where folks are that are in our portfolio, we've invested in, I would say, the most companies in the SF Bay Area, and second is the Golden Triangle. And so it's not without a really broad lens that I say that this area combines capital, but importantly, innovation, talent, and a place that people really like to live. And so you have that recruiting ability. When we help folks spin out of academia, wherever they're based, we help them think through where do they want to locate, and sometimes it's, well, let's move over to the London area because recruiting will be that much stronger. That said, I do know that not every US-based firm invests globally, but we also have a large amount of VC partners that are based either in the UK or the rest of Europe, which do have that sort of boots on the ground context and understanding and cultural understanding of how it goes here. So I would say, yeah, recruiting talent is one of the main things.
And this is more a general question, not just for you specifically, but how much of the kind of the government incentive is about producing locally, hiring local people versus having a headquarter, but perhaps hiring people elsewhere?
I mean,
sort of the supercharging element of the IRA.
Yes, within the IRA. So you do have incentives just for EVs, for example, and then sort of extra bonus points, if you will, in percentages essentially for that domestic manufacturing piece. So it's a hugely important area here in the West when we're trying to source these critical minerals from friendly supply chains that aren't as liable to break when, of course, you have recession or other shifts, right? I'm the first person to say that even though I'm a capitalist, I'm also a globalist, and unfortunately we are evolving into a multipolar world, and so being able to locate friendly sources of these materials is very critical. Within the US policies that I've mentioned, yes, when you apply, you'll have to write this very long section about not just DEI, but also how you're doing essentially pretty deep stakeholder engagement with the folks that will be at the site of that pilot or that demonstration facility to make sure that there are training programs, for example, for colleges or universities to help folks be trained so that local folks can have jobs in these facilities, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I do think it's different with ClimateTech because it's deep tech, isn't it? I mean, Osas aside, the advantage of being a pure play AI company is that you're not going to have actually responsibility for physical sites. And actually, I do think it's going to be different. I think the project financing gap is much bigger. Like your first of kind pilot is going to cost you 300 million. I mean, that's a lot for something that you don't even know is going to work. So that's going to be a problem everywhere in the world. And to your point, it's real stuff in real people's backyards. And that is not something that many of the engineers I work with are particularly good at. You know, engaging with local communities and taking on board the compromise that comes with, you know, working with local tribes and their access to their river, for example. That is, it takes time, it takes a lot of emotional intelligence, and it takes compromise. And that's not something that the Bay Area is particularly good at. And I speak as a former Google employee for many years. So I do think it's going to be different. And I think if you're thinking about setting up a deep tech company in this country, I do think thinking about, like, do we have the natural facilities for this company to both pilot and then have a market? Like, if you're going to do something in steel, you want to be close to where the steel companies are. If you're going to do something in direct air capture, you've got to be somewhere close to burying or how you're going to manage the drawdown. So, you know, you have to be much more sort of thoughtful about where actually is. You know, there's a reason why Israel is the home of desalinization, because they needed to have clean water, right? It was a sort of national security issue to have clean water. Where are the things that actually this country has got the capabilities to do physically, but also the real need to own locally? And I mean, the US is brilliant because they can own and host everything. The country is so big. Don't think that's true here.
Yeah, just on a point that was made by Sarah, I think it's interesting, the whole bit about, like, having the competitive advantage to be able to do something that's homegrown and being able to scale it here. I don't think that we have to have both. Actually, I was part of a previous conversation whereby we kind of almost agreed, or perhaps somewhat tacitly, that the UK is good at innovating. Historically, we haven't been as good at scaling as the US, for example, especially not in recent decades. But I mean, great things that have come out of the UK. The internet, by Tim Berners-Lee, you know, steel production, like large-scale steel production, the Bessemer process. These are all amazing innovations. Television, Netflix, thanks to the UK.
Not Netflix, television,
right?
the BBC.
Reality TV.
Right,
The reality
right. And so if we're really good at, you know, exporting innovation, why don't we just get really good at exporting innovation?
You're right. I mean, I agree with you. Like, it's fine from the innovator's perspective. Like, if it's you and you're like, I'm the innovator, I can go anywhere in the world and I can start here. I agree. I think from a public money perspective, we want to make sure there are benefits to the public citizen. And so whether that's through IP or sort of like, I mean, this country has sort of decimated its manufacturing sector, and I do think that's a problem. It's, even if you want to make things here, it's very, very hard to do. So I do think in this, as Christina referred to, this sort of increasingly difficult geopolitical situation, you are going to have more sort of strategic alliances with countries where you onshore more, or you have sort of offshoring to the Scandinavians, but not to China. Like, those sort of decisions, I think, are going to start happening.
Yeah, and I think there's this interesting sort of tension in some sense where, on the one hand, you want to be stimulating innovation in general. On the other hand, you want to be thinking about policy that is industrial policy that maximizes the local benefits, and they may not always be kind of completely aligned. And thinking about that is just an interesting thing that I'm sure you probably have to be weaving as you're considering it with ARIA as well. So look, we're running a little short in time. We haven't given the audience a chance. So can I first ask, can we get a 5-minute extension so that we have 8 minutes left? Okay, perfect.
No.
So let's have a show of hands. And well, let's get some people who haven't asked questions yet. There you go.
Hi there, Charlie Mitchell-Siopoulos. I'm really interested. There's an awful lot of focus on investment in technology or ideas and things, but there's a terrible lack of focus on investment in infrastructure to support that. How do we overcome that? You know, we try and develop lab space, but you can't get money to develop lab space, but you can get money to develop ideas, and there seems to be a total disconnect.
Actually, yeah, that's one of the I had a conversation with someone yesterday about how do you enable an invention to happen without it being dependent on capital access. So how do you open up wet labs, for example, to lots of people? How do you even know where the labs are? And actually, The national labs in the US are an amazing network you can get access to. We actually have some amazing facilities. You know, Harwell, for example, is an amazing facility in Oxford, but we don't call it a national lab, and we certainly don't sort of promote it in that way. So I do think there's something that, from a sort of government infrastructure perspective, there should be more visibility of what's available and more opening up of those facilities to researchers and scientists. I agree.
Yes, question back there.
Hi, good afternoon. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
So I have three quick questions for all three of you. First one is for Christina. We have been seeing that a lot of investment and funding is done for renewables and decarbonization and negative emissions, but we seldom see any funding or capital investment in natural capital building. So, I mean, we are losing our forests, we are losing our natural capital. So what is your take on that? How do VCs look in that area? Second question is for Sarah. Like you said, your organization is more, sort of funding towards these scientific innovations and talent acquisition. I feel the policies also is an important part of, innovation, because you need talented people who are more having holistic approach and, sort of can analyze and design new policies. So what is your take on that? And the third question is for Osas. Like, I know AI is important and it is inevitable in next 10 years, but I feel that there is some implications of AI in terms of human workforce. I mean, especially the AI penetrating into the conventional engineering areas like steel. How do you see what will be the impact on the human workforce employment? Thank you.
So these are three questions that could take an hour to answer each. So I'm going to maybe take executive privilege and just let you answer your question, which is most pertinent to this area, and then maybe you could take these two other ones offline.
Sure thing.
Yeah.
Perfect. So essentially you're asking, what about the environment? And that's in part why we have our third area, buying for more time for folks on the front lines of climate change and the ecosystems that support them. For example, water security, saving our oceans, coral reefs, deforestation, et cetera. So this is an area we're attentive to, and we think that there are startup opportunities. An example is folks that are doing controlled burns in forest fire prone areas so that you don't have to send in necessarily firefighters. You can have technology that clears the brush. Another example is resilience on our coasts. Folks that can predict sort of that time scale between weather and climate, and try to understand when to clear folks out and how to protect that coastal ecosystem when we appreciate that a hurricane or flood may be coming through. So there are many examples, and happy to talk offline. And of course, carbon dioxide removal, our second bucket, includes natural solutions as an example. So deforestation keeps CO2 on the ground and in the terrestrial biosphere and not in the air, and so that should be incentivized.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll just add one quick thing, which is that obviously venture capitalists also have a fiduciary duty to their limited partners to make money for them. And so it is in their best interest, they have to find risk-adjusted return. And sometimes there's lots of things that are very good for the planet where we haven't figured out a business model to generate enough money to return capital to the limited partners. And that's just a sad fact of life, or it's a fact of life. And until we can have perhaps government or other people come in and put in regulation that can incentivize the kinds of business models that allow the generation of cash, it's not going to be incumbent on you to solve all the problems.
And we do really think that there are going to be venture-backable opportunities, whether it's biodiversity, preventing PFAS from leaking in, to ecosystems, microplastics, and more. I do think that there are going to be opportunities.
Sorry, it's just a quick one too. I work for Innovate UK Edge. I don't have my government checkbook with me, but anybody wants to talk about free money, I'm happy to do so. Sarah, quick question. One of the things I find when I go around looking at scientific endeavors is access to facilities in space, like you mentioned. I'm talking to a property developer to say, can we create some wet labs or scientific labs outside of the university infrastructure, because these guys have left the university and for IP reasons or other reasons, they really don't want to go back there. So is there a fund or an opportunity to create facilities for scientific-backed startups?
I think there should be. At ARIA, we're going to, as well as invest in individuals, which is called ARIA Drive, we're going to launch a program called ARIA Build, which is enabling institutions to form and to do something different. So maybe that would be, maybe you should pitch together to ARIA Build to get some money for wet labs.
I'll try that.
Yeah.
All right, I'll give you second bite at the apple. Yeah.
So for the panel, what is the biggest and hardest thing to decarbonize, and what can be done?
I mean, they're all hard.
That's a big question.
Like, once we decarbonize the grid, then we can say that that's not a hard to decarbonize area until we have, you know, they're all hard for various reasons. Yeah. I would say access to money for pilots and the first demonstration plant is the biggest unlock, and that's across technology areas.
That goes back into the question of check sizes. So what can be done, if anything, for the UK to have bigger chunks of capital available, like the US?
I don't think it is just check size. I think we, to your point, we do moan a lot in this country about things that are wrong. And actually, there's a lot that's right. And the fact that Christina's here, the fact that, you know, Andreessen Horowitz has just opened its office here, like, there is access to US money. I actually think it's about permitting and planning, everyone's favorite topic. I do think if you could get a government to say, if you come to us with a, you know, community-approved plan for a pilot, we will get you planning approval within 6 weeks. That would be a game changer, and companies would be moving from the US to this country.
Yeah, to take advantage of the, you know, cultural appreciation of sustainability, right? U.S. citizens use twice as much energy per capita as UK citizens, right? So there's just a lot that's right with being able to deploy here.
Yeah, I might just quickly add that your last question about pension fund reform, there was a reform in the U.S. in 1979, which is what drove the pension funds there to start deploying more capital to venture capitalists, the Prudent Man Law. And I'm happy to talk to you offline about that.
Well,
it takes a professor to know these things.
Is that anyone wants to talk about pension planning?
Yeah, you need to be a professor in the finance department to know some things. Yes, we'll take a question there.
Hi, Tom Perigo from Hammersmith and Fulham Council. I wanted to ask a question picking up on a few points that have been made about the sort of global nature of the economy, which is currently fragmenting slightly, and how, I suppose, manufacturing, which is a sector that the UK has lost a lot, has benefited from, I suppose, cheap transport costs that mean it agglomerates globally and doesn't need to be near its final demand markets. Yeah. So, picking up on a few points that have been made, if we think that that relationship is changing slightly and towards the end of the age of oil, cheap transport costs evaporate, do the panel think that there's an opportunity for manufacturing to relocate closer to some of the sort of areas of final demand, and how would that change some of their, or how might that change some of their strategies?
Yeah, I mean, it does make a lot of sense. At the same time, these supply chains can be really long. The battery manufacturing supply chain, as an example, where you may have, or you know, and rare earths for example, wind turbines, you may have 10 to 7 to 15 steps in between, and so essentially bootstrapping those supply chains by saying, okay, right, what are we really good at doing in this country or this area of the world? Perhaps it's additive manufacturing and 3D printing, something that's like quite high tech. And then how do we draw the lines between various suppliers, ultimately back to a friendly source of, say, scandium or lithium or whatever it is. And so it is going to be a challenge to create those supply chains. And I think thinking backwards is from existing talents is the right way to do it, because I will say the US is very much similar to the UK in that we have lost a lot of our steel and metallurgical manufacturing expertise and global leadership over the years. So these are careful partnerships to start connecting the dots between, but we're optimistic for a variety of reasons. That said, I mean, I was speaking to the CEO of Lynas Rare Earths recently, and she says, yes, the DoD wants our rare earths. This is the company based in Australia that produces rare earths, but they don't want to pay more for it really ultimately. And so it does become tricky because you want to create this pull, and government procurement is a way to do that, but ultimately it does have to be cost competitive. And China can start dipping its prices, right, and has done that for decades in a variety of sectors. So we have eyes wide open to the risks associated with reshoring and onshoring manufacturing capabilities. It's something that we're hoping to do well, because I will say IRA and et cetera is the first stab at industrial policy in the United States in many decades.
All right. We could go on, but I think I've gone 4 minutes over my 5-minute extension. So in order to give everyone a chance to get coffee and a toilet break before the next panel, let me bring this to a close and just say thank you very much. Please give them a warm round of applause.